The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the express written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
Stationed atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long.
It's Monday, August 6th, Tuesday, August 7th, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, broadcasting to you live from the Great White North, on top of the mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We are 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR radio network and Deep Talk Radio, and we welcome you to tonight's show. And if you want to take a listen to our archives, we have them for free for you. All you do is go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our website is spacedoutradio.com, where we have a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Tonight's show is brought to you by the YouTube channel Ensuho. Sebastian Martin brings high-quality messages to the masses, and you can go to ensuho.com or spacedoutradio.com and subscribe to the channel today. If you've ever been to the British Columbia area of Vancouver Island, you know that there are communities all up and down the coast, which is as big as some countries, that have some blue-collar people who are just there to pretty much chill and relax in retirement. just like stars like Gordon Lightfoot, who enjoys chilling with his guitar on his patio on the Canadian West Coast. From fishing to logging to a couple of big military bases, the island is also home to part of the world's largest and highly potent marijuana growing areas. Yes, even pot loves the ocean view. Tonight, author Daryl Ashby, writer of the book 85 Grams, introduces all of us to Art Williams, your everyday guy who looked like a good old community guy until he disappeared and his secrets came out as one of the West Coast's largest drug kingpins. How did he pull it off? We find out tonight. Then in the bottom of hour number 3, Everett Themer will be back with our latest edition of The Encounter from our Spaced Out Radio newsroom. But first, we introduce all of you to Daryl Ashby, a Vancouver Island Canadian writer, author extraordinaire of 85 Grams. Daryl, thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio. How you doing?
Good evening, Dave. Daryl Ashby here. Of course, I'm excited. We'll see how this goes. It should be a new experience for me.
Well, I hope you have some fun. I'm going to get you to move a little bit closer to your microphone if you don't mind. Would really appreciate that because we do need to make sure our sound is looking very, very good or sounding very, very good. Daryl, thank you so much for coming on. And, you know, most of our listeners are in the United States. And a lot of times we try to cater to what they are dealing with on a daily basis in the weird and strange. But every now and again, we like to introduce them to some real interesting Canadian content, stories that they have never heard of. And before we get into who Art Williams was, I'd like to learn and introduce you to our audience. How did you get into writing and decide that this was something that you wanted to get into?
I've always had an interest in history, more particularly history that nobody else has taken the time to research and write about. When it comes to Art Williams, nobody had really done a deep, investigative, journalistic approach to his life, what he had been involved in. And as a result of that, that's where I was naturally drawn.
Were you always a writer, or is this something that just kind of fell into place?
It sort of fell into place. I never even picked up a book to read until the age of 40. Never started writing until the age of 50. And did a historical account of the Pacific Northwest here with the first settler that decided to take up land. That book was a good success. It's still out there today, quite popular. And we just looked for another project, and this particular one fell into our lap by no stranger means, and we just didn't seem to be able to avoid it.
So when you were deciding to write on this story, and we're going to get into a lot of it, because this is so intriguing. And this is a story that most Canadians don't even know happened. But let's first get into Vancouver Island. Tell us about the island. Now, I used to live on the island. I actually started my radio career in Parksville, Qualicum Beach, at a little tiny dinky radio station there before going to the big city of Nanaimo, which is on Vancouver Island, both central Vancouver Island's east coast. And a lot of people don't realize the history of Vancouver Island, that British Columbia's capital is there, and it is literally the gateway to the Pacific. So you live there. Explain to people a little bit about Vancouver Island. I mean, we're talking about an island that is literally the size of a lot of countries in this world.
That's correct. It's 370 miles long. That's northeast or northwest to southeast, and it's about 70 miles wide. It's 20 miles off the mainland. Temperature, the climate is very moderate year-round. It's a great location. I was born and raised here, spent 68 years in Victoria, and moved up to Nanaimo 2 years ago, not too far from where you were originally stationed, and settled in here for retirement.
It really is a basking place for many people across the country who have retired because it's peaceful. I mean, you have to go to and fro from a ferry or an airplane. There's no bridge to cross there. But I mean, it is some of the most picturesque areas that you could ever see on this planet.
I've often thought I could work for Ministry of Tourism. I love the place so much. And as you say, it's a retirement center, especially Qualicum Parks, from the Nanaimo area, the north, the beautiful beaches, sandy beaches, the temperate weather. It's a wonderful place to be. Most of those that decide to retire and are looking for a favorable spot, who are Canadians, move west, come out basically to the coast.
It is a beautiful, beautiful place. And you know, I had the attitude when I lived there, I'd never moved off of the mainland before. And so moving to Vancouver Island, it's one of those places where you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. I always thought of it as a beautiful place to visit. I can honestly say the island never felt like home to me. And I don't know why, but it didn't. But the island has so many intriguing stories, let alone the drug trade, because a lot of it happens there. But Chinese migrants were washing up on shore as early as 10 years ago in these rugged, rusted out hulls of ships that had no steering. It is very well known as, if you look in the paranormal genre, as being a very haunted location. There are, some of the best Bigfoot sightings up and down the island. And then you have a lot of Canada's UFO sightings that happen there too. What makes the island so unique, not only for the people, but for the high strangeness that seems to happen all around there, Daryl?
That's a question that I don't believe I can even begin to answer. It is definitely a melting pot for everybody you can conceive. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was a huge influx of people coming across the border who were trying to evade the draft. I have friends that literally ran from the military in order to avoid going back to a hotbed of fighting. And they've taken up and they've stayed here and they've raised their families, and they would never be anyplace else. Why it's become this mixing pot, you might say, of every oddity you can imagine, I don't know. Possibly it's the isolation that gives somebody the idea, the concept that we're buffered. That's probably why Art Williams of 85 Grams came here, is because he found a little community that he felt he could disappear in rather than be swallowed up by the big cities.
And don't forget that the great white sharks are now coming up the West Coast. That scares the hell out of me.
They've been spotted here for years, but they're rather docile in our water temperatures.
Well, one of the, and there's a little bit of history that a lot of people don't know, but in Bamford, which is a little fishing/logging community on the West Coast, one of the biggest great white sharks ever caught was there in I believe it was the 90s. It was something like 20.5 feet long. It was ridiculous.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And there's another, you bring up the matter of the water, and our fishing is just second to none. I mean, to go out and catch 60, 70 pounds salmon is not unheard of. 30 pound is average. I mean, it's a mecca for the outdoors people.
It truly is. It truly is. And if you ever come up to British Columbia, if you're in the United States or you're listening to us over in Europe or Australia, wherever you may be, you definitely have to take a tour over to Vancouver Island. It is just a beautiful place and a hotbed for weird, strange, paranormal type activity. It really is. Really is. Hey, in Nanaimo, you're in Nanaimo now.
Yes.
Do they still do that on Halloween? Let me explain this to my audience. Nanaimo, as you just west of town, has this real dark and dreary road that I think about 30, 40 years ago, after Halloween, people take their Halloween pumpkins and put them along this street. So literally, there are volunteers who go around as the pumpkins are decomposing. They literally go around and light candles in all these pumpkins each and every night. So it's almost like the legend of Sleepy Hollow, where every Halloween you get this corridor of pumpkins. Have you done that yet?
Well, I haven't done it, but I know what you're talking about. A number of the other communities up and down the island have picked up on that, and they're starting to do it themselves.
It really is beautiful. It's eerie but beautiful at the same time. Daryl, let's get into why we're here tonight, because we have about 2 hours and 15 minutes with you to discuss all aspects of Art Williams. This is a major Canadian mystery. It's an unsolved crime, if we could call it that, in a true crime drama. So tell us who Art Williams is or was.
Oh, how do you sum that up in a few words? English gentleman.
Well, we have lots of time, so go into lots of detail.
Okay. He was born and raised in England, not too far outside of London. Fought during the Second World War, enlisted late in the war in 1943, just because of age, no other reason. There's some huge stories around his military contribution, you might say. Wounded twice, hasn't received a lot of medals. He always believed he was under-recognized for the service he gave, but came to Canada at the end of the war and settled in the Edmonton area of Alberta. And there he met his wife, Margaret. She was working in a cafe or a small restaurant, and they were married shortly thereafter. As things progressed, he migrated out to the coast, and as I mentioned, he looked for a small community that wasn't overly populated and picked on the small town site just south of Nanaimo called Ladysmith. Found himself a small plot of land and began to create a new life for himself, for he and his wife. That's basically Art Williams in a nutshell, and from there the story just gets interesting.
So he did serve in the World War. I mean, this is a gentleman who should have been recognized and maybe was a little bit upset with the fact that he wasn't given his due for serving his country.
Well, this is true. For anybody that would listen to him, he told them that he enlisted early at the age of 16, lied about his age, but I've managed to acquire his war records, and in fact, he was 18 when he enlisted, and shortly after enlisting, he was fired off to the front lines in Europe as a mechanic, as a driver, not necessarily as a rifleman. But he definitely saw the front lines. He definitely was wounded. He, one point, received a number of pieces of shrapnel through his legs. In another case, he was in the heat of the battle, and he was actually bayoneted by the Germans. In the first case, he was shipped back to London, where he was treated, hospitalized for a short period of time, and then sent back again for the bayonet. He was treated in the field. He seemed to have difficulty telling the difference between truth and fiction. So I have a number of letters that were sent home that spoke of him being captured by the Germans, being transported by train to Berlin, and he and the fellow that was also captured managed to overtake the German guards when they fell asleep at night, killed them, jumped off the train, and had them their shackling, you might say, severed when the next train came along. None of this can be supported by his military records. He went on to suggest that he was a pilot in the wooden gliders that flew the planes into the troops into Ardennes. Again, records don't support it. A lot of things such as this seem to be a figment of his imagination, but At the same time, we've interviewed people that have fought with him, and they state that the only reason that he and the fellow we interviewed stayed alive is they just never got drunk, whereas everybody else would sort of take whatever liquor they could find en route and stick their head above the trench, and sniper would shoot it off. Well, Art and this other fellow was smart enough to keep their heads below line. But fascinating war stories. If you can believe half of them, it's still a great story. And he did serve until the end, and he was honorably discharged.
So was he a compulsive liar, or just somebody who liked to embellish the truth to make himself look maybe a little bit better than what he was?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. I believe he was just a person that had to embellish what he had to capture the attention of others. Those that really knew him, those that were close to him, said that he would never lie or fabricate anything to them. But for anybody that he disliked or distrusted, he would go to any degree whatsoever just to string them along.
Mm-hmm. So do you think then that this is how his life of deception really began, was, maybe the PTSD and everything coming out of the war?
Wow. That's a thought I hadn't considered. But that you're probably right on. That wasn't a disease or an infliction that was considered or even thought of in those days. But he definitely came away with so much memory of carnage that he felt that any future wars would be fought with the truest and only weapon, and that would be a bow and arrow. Hence, he got into developing the Williams bow, and that became very well known internationally.
So with him then, why did he think that, in your opinion, that the next bunch of wars we fought with bows and arrows?
Well, he knew that the nuclear demonstration was what put the end to the Second World War, and he felt that any future wars would be total annihilation. And he felt the only way that they could be fought bravely, properly, so all men were equal, would be with the old weapons.
Wow.
And there's no fabrication there. That was his true belief.
So he made a lot of money then off of these bows and arrows that he was creating. Talk about that for a little bit.
Bear Archery, which is one of the largest manufacturers of archery weapons, even today, was his only competitor, really. And he was cutting into their profit margin significantly. He started out with a small shed producing these, managed to perfect them so they didn't self-destruct when somebody pulled them. Started looking at how to beat the world record at distance. That was his target, was to be able to develop a bow that could throw an arrow further than anybody else. Study the history of the Middle East and their bows that were done out of elk horns and sinew. And even at that time in the 60s held the record for distance. And he figured if they could do it, he could do it with modern technology. So he started finding wood in various locations. A friend of his, a fellow by the name of Happy Laughing, I know it sounds like a joke, but that is his name, worked for the local mill as a longshoreman, and he would garner the bung that they used, or the dung that they used for shoring up the loads within the ships. It was discarded when it came into port, and it was always exotic woods. And he would take this over to Art's place, and they would design the most beautiful bows you can imagine with this material. And he built his own press, he built his own testing equipment to determine what their poundage was. And he just started putting out product, and pretty soon he found the shed was just not big enough. The demand was too great, so he actually took a government loan down and built a factory beside his home in Ladysmith. And he was doing really, really good until such a time as I'm being told that Bear Archery purchased the rights to the resin that he needed in order to keep his bows laminated together. And they were not willing to sell him, of course, any of the resin. So his business just went to bunk at that point. His loan was called. They brought in receivership bailiffs to seize all his property related to the archery. And it's at that time that he sort of tweaked. He morphed into a man that was going to fight the system no matter what. And that's basically where the story really, really, really gets interesting.
Around Ladysmith, which, so our audience knows, former Playboy model Pamela Anderson is from there as well.
That's correct.
That's where she was actually discovered, and she still takes the ferry.
She still owns property here.
Yeah, and her family is there too. But, you know, for people wondering where Ladysmith is, or, you know, what the hell Ladysmith is all about, that's their great citizen, Pamela Anderson. But nonetheless, explain Ladysmith a little bit to the public. What kind of town is it, and how was art back in the day really looked upon in that town?
Well, first off, Ladysmith was a small community at that time, only a matter of 15,000, 20,000 people. Not large by any means. It's a slope. It rises directly up from the water, so pretty well every home within Ladysmith has some sort of a view out over the inside passage towards the mainland, to Vancouver, Mission, and so forth. Art was received as an intellect. It didn't matter what conversation he walked in on, he could hold his own on it. And he was well liked. Friends of ours, and this is, as I say, we were drawn into the story no matter what we did. Somebody pulled us into it. Friends of ours from years back bought property in Ladysmith on their retirement. And unbeknownst to us and them, the property was directly across the road from Art Williams. The day after they move in, knock on the door, elderly lady or middle-aged lady at that time at the door with a pie in her hand, and she wanted to welcome my friends to the community. And this was Margaret Williams, Art's wife. And their friendship just grew from there. They would constantly go over across the road to Art's place and Margaret's place and have scones and tea. And the conversation always seemed to be exciting, stirring, never a dull moment. At no time in that period where they knew each other was it ever obvious to my friends that there was something strange going on behind the scene, that Art was anything other than this man next door that everybody wanted to know.
So was he a staple in the community, like a community volunteer, or somebody who was involved in, say, Rotary or Kinsmen or something along those lines?
No, he kept very much to himself. But if you were in need and he knew about it, he would do everything within his power to help you. At that time, we were somewhat of a hippie community. Those that wanted to drop out of society, get off the grid, sort of look towards the island again because of the isolation. Art opened up his property. He had 5 acres. He opened up the back of his property to the hippies. They moved in with tents, metal sheds, old school buses, anything at all that could provide shelter, and he allowed them to live there. But one thing he didn't sanction is, especially the males, if they weren't prepared to apply themselves. He was prepared to provide them with free accommodation as far as the land is concerned, not ask anything from them, but if in turn he did ask for help and they refused, they were shown the road. Their wife and family were allowed to stay, but the men were not. He just had a certain standard, and like I say, he would help anybody that needed help. A little lady that lives next door to him, actually in a trailer park adjacent, her septic tank gave out one night. She didn't know what to do. She was all by herself. He went over there and dug her tank up and rebuilt the thing right through the night so that she could get back to a normal lifestyle. Never asked anything from her. Another fellow had a son that was ailing, and he was strapped to a machine, a dialysis machine, I believe. And at one point, the machine broke down. Some part within it was not available. They couldn't get anything out for a matter of weeks from the hospital or the local system. Art had a little machine shop, a lathe. He went and built the part, put it in, got it working, basically saved the kid's life. It's just the type of guy he was, and he never looked for recognition. As much of a blowhard he was, he never really looked for anybody to pat him on the back and give him thanks.
But that's a type of person that you would say, especially for our American listeners, that's kind of the Canadian way of doing things, is not seeking the recognition. It was more about just helping those in need and helping those maybe in a destitute situation rather than looking for the accolades.
Well, I think that's true. We can say that about Canadians, but I lived half a year for the last decade down in the lower states, and I saw it within the Americans themselves, so I wouldn't want to cast an aspersion that they're not so inclined.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm saying, but I mean, when a lot of our American listeners listen to us, you know, they have a preconceived notion of what Canadian people are like.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
So, you know, I mean, it's just that's why I wanted to kind of point that out. So here we have this guy who was very helpful unless he got screwed over, and then was he vengeful to people who he felt were not giving him the respect or the dignity that he deserved?
I saw no vengeful nature in him, but he would definitely isolate them from any contact he had, any influence he had. He would not allow himself to be mistreated a second time. He didn't have an angry bone in his body when it came to inflicting pain. According to his adopted son, he would actually trap flies in a bottle and take them outside and release them. It's just, you know, but at the same time, he believed in justice to all men, but not necessarily according to the law as you and I know it. He had an inept ability to interpret the law as he believed it should be interpreted.
So on that end, did he have a lot of run-ins with the RCMP?
After the demise of his archery business, his name became flagged with the RCMP. Not for anything in particular. Well, I shouldn't say that. There was one case where there was a parcel that showed up at the local post office and came from overseas and supposedly had some marijuana in it. And its registration was as a book. When the RCMP opened up, they found that the center of the book had been carved out, and indeed there was some very nice choice bud in the middle of it. They followed it to Art's place, and Art suspected something was amok, so he left the parcel on the dash of his truck. RCMP showed up in the morning and said, "Where's the marijuana?" He said, what are you talking about? He says, "The parcel you picked up the other day from the post office, we know it had marijuana in it." He says, "I haven't got the faintest what's in that parcel. I left it out in the truck because I didn't know what it was." They really didn't have a case, but they took him to court anyways. And after it had gone through its formality, basically the judge just threw it out because there was no evidence whatsoever to charge that he knew what he had. That was his first encounter. No, that's possible. Yeah, that was his first encounter. His second encounter was the bailiffs that turned his archery business upside down. He had gone in hearing they were coming, and he stripped the buildings of all the machinery, even tore the electrical panel off the wall. When the bailiff showed up, they automatically blamed him or accused him of theft and charged him. And the only evidence they had was a short 2-inch piece of electrical wire that came out of the panel and happened to match the panel itself or where the panel once was. But again, it went to court. They didn't have sufficient evidence, and it was thrown out. So he seemed to be gaining this momentum of being able to outsmart the authorities, and he thought he could continue to do it. As he got involved in the drug trade, he felt he could still outsmart them, and he continued to do it for a spell. But as far as vengeance is concerned, no, I don't think he had vengeance in his nature.
But he did have kind of like the law of man type attitude where he should be able to do what he wanted, when he wanted, how he wanted, instead of being restricted by what he felt was a little bit of oppressive law brought in by the Canadian government and enacted by the RCMP.
I think you're right there, yes. When it came to the drug MDA, which he is known for, when he started producing it, there was no law against it. Timothy O'Leary was doing his trip down in the southwestern states with LSD, other synthetic drugs of the day. But Art felt that this was a social drug. It wasn't going to kill anybody. He ensured that the product he produced was pure enough that nobody was going to get a negative impact from it. And he put it out on the streets, and he did so before it ever became an illegal matter. He just wanted to bend the rules enough in order to accommodate those that felt they were tied down, they were constricted too much by the law of the land.
And the attitude of Vancouver Island people is there is a lot of that there because they want to just go out, relax, and enjoy life. That's what island life is all about. And even when I lived there, you know, in the late 1990s at the turn of the millennium, there were still people out there who absolutely hated the RCMP, not because they were cops, but because they were bringing that police lifestyle to a place where everybody just wants to chill out, have a drink on the beach or on their patio, and smoke a doobie if they want. And that's just island life, isn't it?
It's still that way today. And the Gulf Islands, which, as you know, are a number of islands between us and the mainland, as you get more and more isolated on those that don't have normal ferry service or whatever, this lifestyle of doing your own thing becomes more and more the norm. We have wonderful plantations of bud here. BC bud is probably one of the greatest products, I think, produced. I mean, it's not able to be beat elsewhere. I know people that I've come to know through this story who have developed such a high strain of the product that it's become the demand, the product to have. It is, as you say.
I talked to an RCMP officer who said that at one point during the 90s and 2000s, that the drug lords of Canada, whether they were tied to a gang like the Hells Angels or any of the Asian gangs, they would take ships, like we're talking 40, 50 tons of marijuana from BC into international waters and exchange it straight across for drugs like cocaine and heroin and hash, because the market value of British Columbia bud at that time was equivalent to these other drugs that, when imported into the United States and Canada, were making billions, not millions, but billions of dollars in profit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The fellow that I was alluding to, I can give you his name now because he passed away a couple of years ago, and he never once hid the matter. But his name is Ralph Harris, and he's a fellow from Yellow Point area just south of Ladysmith. And if one wanted to research the ships called the Western Wind and the Baku, B-A-K-U, these were two of his ships, and he did just that. But on the return side, he would bring in cocaine or other product that seemed to be of value. We had a market drop, you might say, for our bud. And it was a bad year, so he went down and brought in 300 tons of Mexican marijuana and got caught. That was with the Baku. And with the Western Wind, he brought in 60 tons of cocaine on a return trip. But that man was charged 13 times, and even to his own amazement, he was never convicted. 13 times he got off. But he was probably one of the greatest, if you forgive the acronym, he was probably one of the greatest achievers of trafficking on the West Coast here. That was not riding in a particular group with colors on their back.
And
But that's a story in itself.
let's face it, I mean, there's almost your next book right there, Daryl.
Well, it would have been if he hadn't passed away. He and I were going to get together.
Oh, darn it.
As it is right now, the fellow that's in the book, E752, that was the identification given to him by the RCMP. He's going to be getting together with me in the fall, and we're going to work out his story, which will, you might see it be the sequel to 85 Grams.
I think
he was
I
a
think
far bigger trafficker than any of them.
I think you brought up a very, very good point that a road that we should actually go down a little bit in regards to the drug trade at that time, as people always used to think that that marijuana came from the southern U.S. or into Mexico or into Central America. And yet in British Columbia, it really, up until the late 80s, was not a big known drug around here, unless you were, I hate to use the word, back in high school from the 80s, but a stoner kind of person or a hippie type person who would use marijuana at that time. And British Columbia was almost, it just kind of came out of nowhere, where all of a sudden these crops of marijuana are going and literally running the entire drug circuit. So if we could delve into that a little bit, I think that would be fantastic.
I was in land development in the early 70s in the Greater Victoria area, and on a number of occasions I would be requested to go out onto a large parcel of land and determine how it could be broken up into housing. And more than once I would go out, and in these isolated little patches on the side of a hill or whatever, there would be a number of plants being grown, and not necessarily adjacent to a home or anything like what you would think, but this was going on in the 70s. And some large plantations were quite prevalent, but as you say, the system was not as vocal about it. We didn't have computers in those days, of course, so the internet was not our media. I think a lot of things went on. There was still a lot of production, a lot of trafficking, a lot of usage, but it just didn't get the media attention that it does today, just because of the way technology has changed.
At what point did British Columbia become a drug haven for marijuana growers?
Oh, drug haven. Gee, how do we nail that one down? I don't know if there's any definitive date, but it's definitely, I would say definitely in the late 80s, it started to become more known, more available. Ralph Harris picked up the vacuum after Art Williams disappeared in the production of MDA, and he went on to develop some of the first quasi-commercial marijuana grow-ops. He had a huge hydroponics set up in his basement of his home, and never once was he ever convicted for the same. He would import seeds from all over the world and just keep breeding and cutting and planting. And finally, he ended up with this hybrid strain that was recognized as being the best there is. So when did it actually happen? I don't know. I can't put a date on it, but definitely by the time we hit the 90s, it was known.
Because British Columbia never really had a gang culture until the early to mid 90s is when it really started to take off in the marijuana drug trade. And all of a sudden you saw groups such as the Hells Angels, the Triads, and, a lot of the, East Indian or, Southeast Asian gangs all of a sudden trying to take over this massive, massive amount of marijuana, from grow-ops happening in your neighbor's house to, literally lining the sides of mountains that are hidden by the massive fir trees that are all around. it really just shot out of the wind, didn't it?
Well, it's definitely out of control if you want to look at it from that standpoint. The Asian gangs, as you say, Surrey on the mainland is just it's the hell of all West Coast settlements. Excuse me for deflaming them the way I have. But I remember in the 60s that the Mafia had a foothold in Victoria. And my father-in-law built a number of buildings that, with their money. And yet they were always under the radar. In the 60s, the 101 Knights were a motorcycle gang out of Powell River. And there was a number of smaller gangs, you might say, that rode up and down the island. And they decided to optimize this market that we're talking about on Vancouver Island. And they came over and they gave all the other gangs, the bike gangs, an ultimatum. You either fold your tent, throw away your colors, or we'll do it for you. And they all, including the bounty hunters, which was probably the largest of the other groups, seceded to them. And the 101 Knights became the principal venue for trafficking on the West Coast. Hell's Angels were established on the mainland, but nothing on the island. It was 1981. Hell's Angels came over and sat down with the 101 Knights, or the executive of it, and determined that they had potential. And they changed over at that point to the Satan's Angels. And they ran those colors for a couple of years, and in 1983 they transitioned into the Hells Angels chapter. And the Nanaimo chapter, as a matter of fact, here on the island, and they're still in good standing today.
You know, it's funny you bring up Satan's Angels. I actually went on a paranormal investigation. I got called, my team did, up here. And one of the places they were complaining about was, for hauntings, was in the garage. Walk into the garage, and it is Satan's Angels memorabilia all over the place.
Oh, really?
And I never met the gentleman, nor will I mention their names.
That's okay.
But it literally scared the hell out of me. Scared the hell out of me. And no pun intended. But it was absolutely... I'd never heard of the Satan's Angels up until that day. And, you know, now that you bring it up, I'm like, wow, well, that's putting some pieces together.
Yep. They, I've got a couple of photographs of theirs on my Facebook site for the 85 grams. And a couple of the family members have been kind enough to donate them. A few of the boys are still walking this earth, and they've connected through Facebook to the site I have there. They're interesting to talk to. If you've got any photographs taken from that place, I would love it if you could share them with me.
I had to erase those.
How unfortunate.
Yes, but nonetheless, very interesting indeed how it did start to tie into an in total gang entity here in British Columbia, you know, and then you wonder why, you know, Vancouver has such an opiate and fentanyl type problem. It all started back then with the marijuana trade and trying to gain everything going. I remember working for the radio station on Vancouver Island. And like clockwork, every 6 weeks they would park an RCMP vehicle down at the docks between Parksville and Lasqueti Island, which was about a quarter way across the bay. And every 6 weeks they harvested. And these guys, they would catch the ferry over to the main part of the island in order to get the marijuana out. So you can only carry so many hockey bags. You know, I mean, this is how some of these people were carrying it. Was they would you know, bring a couple of hockey sticks, and you know, they would have like 6 or 7 hockey bags. Well, obviously, it is what it is.
Yeah,
and this is how they would try and smuggle it across, because the Lasqueti Island didn't have an airport. It did have boat ports, but I mean, the boating area is pretty easy to tell when you're stuck in the middle of the island. it's pretty easy to tell, who's going back and forth, especially when the RCMP helicopters are always flying the area.
Yeah, Lasqueti Island is still known as being one of the primary regions to avoid local law authority if you want to do the unusual.
For sure.
I don't know if you heard the story, but around the time that you're speaking of, there was a small pleasure craft that pulled up onto the beach in Parksville and proceeded to unload these carry bags that they had, duffel bags. Fellow wandered down to the boat and asked if he could help, and sure enough, they employed him because there was quite a few of them and quite a few bags involved. And after they got them all unloaded, the fellow pulled out his badge and arrested them. But it's sort of standard humor for around here. They weren't the brightest people in the world that sort of took up space there, but they sure know how to produce the product.
That they do. We only got about 5 minutes here before we have to go to our first break of the night. In regards to, and we'll get to more of Art Williams and his incredible story and disappearance after the break, but in regards to the drug trade in British Columbia, do people on the island now just look at it and say, well, this is part of island life now, or is there still a faction of people over there that look at this entire topic and just wish it would just go away?
I think it's becoming more and more accepted, to be honest. I'm not, and I'll be quite frank, I'm not a participant. So what I say can be taken without prejudice, but I believe the general culture is such that people that I've known straight-laced are now looking at the resin as being a medicinal product that they should not overlook. I think it's become more and more the norm, especially with legislation going the way it is, in the direction of approving it. I have a friend here who has a very large sanctioned grow-op, one of the largest ones on the island, and it's just a cash cow. I mean, and nobody really thinks much of it when they drive past a dispensary today, and they're all over the place. So in answer to your question, I think it's becoming quite accepted.
And I think that's a good thing as Canada goes towards legalization of marijuana and being the second country in the world to fully allow it to happen as soon as they could figure out how to tax it. But nonetheless, because it all comes down to taxes, nonetheless, before you got into learning about Art Williams, what was your stance on marijuana comparatively then to now?
Oh, quite a opposite end of the pendulum, to be quite honest. I was not supportive of drugs in any way, shape, or form. I raised my girls to understand and believe the same. They made their own choices, of course, when they got to the age of accountability. But today, I believe strongly that there was too much money consumed, wasted, your money, my money, tax money, on fighting a social drug, incarcerating those involved, when here we are, the evolution 30 years later, and they're opening the door to it. It seems a shame that we've gone the full gauntlet there and not just recognized it as being what it is in the beginning and just allowed it to go through the system. But I'm much more open-minded today than I was then.
There are still some staunch people who refuse to give up that attitude or that notion that marijuana is bad, even though statistics are showing and studies are showing that it is quite different. Do you think that mentality kind of remains with the older crew of the society?
Well, it's definitely going to stay with the baby boomer or older group. And I'm not totally convinced it doesn't lead to other things. I can speak freely that my grandson is a user, and because of his consumption, he has decided to experiment from time to time with other things, none of which really has been good for his body, his state of mind. The use of marijuana that he has, to the extent it has someone left him unmotivated. I don't know how else to put it. So he really doesn't have a great desire to become anything other than just your average blue-collar worker when he has all the ability to become exceptional. I think it can be a detriment to some people if it's not used properly.
I can see that. I can absolutely see where you're going with that. And is it something that you find will be concerning in the future, in your opinion?
I don't think any more so than alcohol, which can be overly consumed and destroy a family, an individual. I think it'll fall right in line along with that.
Well, we shall soon see. We shall soon see. We got about 20 seconds here before we got to go to our first break of the night. Our guest tonight on the show is author Daryl Ashby. And he has this amazing story about a gentleman named Art Williams who disappeared after a plane crash because he knew he was wanted by the Canadian RCMP on drug dealing. He was a major kingpin in the marijuana trade, and we're going to learn all about that coming up with Daryl right after this. You know, I do have to say, and I will ask you this, Daryl, after the break, this sounds so much like the D.B. Cooper case. Maybe not in the way like there was a hijacking or anything, but the plane crash disappears. It just seems to seem very reminiscent of the two. But nonetheless, we will get more with Daryl Ashby on Art Williams coming up right after the break.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with the Euphor Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm going to take you for a ride every Sunday night on Spaced Out Sundays. I'm going to set up your week with some strange tales from across North America, from psychic readings, Sasquatch, UFOs, to the most haunted locations. Come join me at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and let's get weird together. I'd love for you to join me. Spaced Out Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
There's news, and there's The Encounter. This is Spaced Out Radio News Director Everett Thiemer inviting you to check out The Encounter. Our half-hour news segment every Monday through Friday night is different compared to what you're used to. Our goal is to bring you the weird, strange, and interesting stories the mainstream tends to leave out, and stories that will make you scratch your head in disbelief. The Encounter can also be found at spacedoutradio.com and on our Facebook page, SOR The Encounter. Come give us a read.
We're bringing scientific thought to the paranormal. Hi there, this is Spaced Out Radio scientist Chris Cogswell. Join me, Chris Zuger, and Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month, where we break down the who from the woo when it comes to everything paranormal. We'll investigate and try to bring sensible answers to those straight and sometimes outlandish questions people have. Hey, not everything has an answer, but we'll do our best. Listen in to Reality Paranormal only on Spaced Out Radio.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Hey, this is Canadian Paranormal Investigator Mike Moore. The third Wednesday of every month, I'll be teaming up with Dave Scott to bring you Ghosts of the Great White North. Each month, we will bring on guests from across Canada to discuss their ghostly encounters. Canada is a paranormal hotbed with stories you've never heard, so we're going to bring them to you. So get comfy on your Chesterfield, grab a donut, and join us, eh?
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag Spaced Out Radio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to hour number 2 of Spaced Out Radio. Tonight, I am your host, Dave Scott. Thank you so much for being with us. Tomorrow night on the show, Geraldine Orozco is back with another monthly edition of The Spiritual You, where we get into all the Zen and Chi and yoga and lots of flexing going on. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome back everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network, including Deep Talk Radio. And don't forget, you can also check out our archives on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/spacedoutradio. They are free. Just do old Davey the favor, hit that subscribe button. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Fizbataki is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, space travelers, as Bill sets the password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to check out our website, spacedoutradio.com, we got a plethora of features for you. Rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Tonight, we are talking with author Daryl Ashby. We are talking about an unsolved crime here on the west coast of Canada. Drug czar Art Williams. And Daryl's book is 85 grams, and you can find that on Amazon. And I highly suggest, if you love true crime, this is the story that you definitely want to check out. Daryl, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
Now, right before the break, as we get into how Art disappeared, I kind of threw it out there that there are a lot of strange similarities between that and the D.B. Cooper case. But in talking to you during the break, even more interesting is that it was like the television show Breaking Bad. I mean, we focused on marijuana because British Columbia has been known a lot about marijuana and the marijuana trade here. But Art was kind of ahead of his curve when it came to his creation.
Art was incredibly intelligent. There's not a person I've talked to, interviewed, whether it be RCMP or whether it be his close circle of friends, that won't agree. He was beyond most people's intellectual level. When his archery business went defunct, as I say, he morphed into something completely different. He decided to take yet another government grant from the same people that foreclosed on him, and he got it. And he used some of the money in order to develop a large lab at the back of his property on West Down Road in Ladysmith for the purpose of developing a hybrid mushroom. Along with his vision that future wars will be fought with ancient weapons, he believed that he could produce a consumable product such as a mushroom grown on newspaper, which there's plenty of, and human waste. Anybody can grow it, and it would feed the world. But unbeknownst to the authority, he took some of that money and diverted it to a hidden lab on his property for the production of MDA, known as the love drug in its day. It was a pure social drug. It did not have any addictive qualities. And he started producing this long before the laws of the land said you could not. By the time he had perfected the drug, it was 68% pure, which was quite renowned, quite remarkable. He was providing 85% of the market up and down the West Coast, from California to Alaska and east to Manitoba. And if anybody enjoyed the product in that day, they were likely consuming his product. It was the 101 Knights who were doing the majority of the trafficking distribution, although he himself got his flying license and purchased a couple of planes, and he would fly to points unknown, assuming to distribute it himself from time to time. But that's basically the long and short of it. As for D.B. Cooper, which you had mentioned earlier, yes, indeed, he disappeared, and he disappeared with large sums of money. He left large sums of money behind because that didn't seem to be his motivation in life. He didn't live the glossy gold chain type of lifestyle that you see most drug lords do. He dressed in a plaid lumberman's jacket, lived in a frumpy little worn-down duplex on a cluttered piece of land, and drove an old beat-up Ford pickup truck. He never flaunted his money other than just to torment the authorities.
How much was Art worth?
His actual value was in the millions. When he disappeared, 18 months later, his wife disappeared, Margaret. And in her woodpile in front of the house, a fellow managed to find an ice cream bucket, one of these large circular ice cream buckets with $56,700 in it. According to Art's girlfriend, and that's another story, he left Margaret not long after the collapse of his archery business and took up lifestyle with Shirley Ferguson, who lived in the other half of the duplex on his property as a renter, and adopted her two boys. But when he had left $90,000 with a friend that was supposed to be shared between Margaret and Shirley if anything was to happen with them, well, that $90,000 today is, crowding very close to $250,000. He had flown, prior to his disappearance, he had flown twice down to Belize in his 180 Cessna. And we know he left $90,000 with a fellow by the name of Gordon Loomis in Desert Hot Springs, California, with the intent to pick it up later. There's good reason to believe he transported other large sums of money to Belize. People he traveled with know nothing more than the fact that they were going on a business trip. And once they landed, they separated. Except for spending the night together, they did their own thing during the day, so they don't know what he was doing. I managed to acquire some film strip, 35 millimeter film strip from his stepson, or his adopted son, Danny Ferguson. And in there's a series of photographs taken by Art, one in fact behind a house, which is part of a panorama scene that he took of a waterfront. And according to his son and those that know him, he never did anything without intent. And the general gist is that this was a home that he was looking at coming back to. So, Cooper, yes, there is some similarity, more so to the show, the series Breaking Bad. Had this book been written 10 years ago, when Breaking Bad came out just a few years back, I would have been looking for them for compensation, because the similarity is so strong.
Did he know what the chemicals were doing? Like, how did he get this idea? Because when you're playing with chemicals, you're really playing with potential explosives. So how did he get started on the chemical run to create MDA?
Well, there's a number of theories on that. He's the only one that knows for sure. One person suggested that it was one of the hippies out the back of his property had led him to the need and the marketplace. This Gordon Loomis was an electrical engineer, highly intelligent, very brilliant man who lived just down the road from Art on Pallades Island, which you may have heard of. It was owned by a couple of people. They were owners of half of it. And Gordon was a free thinker. Some suggested that Gordon provided him the remedy or the recipe from searching out UBC Library in Vancouver. Nobody really knows for sure. We do know that it is a product that was produced back in the early 40s. I believe it was German by nature, but the U.S. had used it as an appetite suppressant for their military. Then it was used as a truth serum, and then pharmaceuticals started using it as a diet pill. So it's been around for a while, but not really produced in illicit state until Art really got involved. His knowledge, he's self-taught in everything. Everything he learned by study. He was an insatiable reader. He had a library that he believed was better than, or had some books that even the University of Victoria Library doesn't have. And he just perfected it until he had it right, and he wouldn't put it on the market until it was.
Is there any word why he got into this trade? Was it just to make money, or was it just the fact that in his way it was kind of playing with the police?
I think it was playing with the authorities. He was smart enough to know that sooner or later it would become an illicit drug. He wanted to get in there and get it on the system or in the system before that became the part. He was taken to court for production and trafficking of MDA in 1973. I should mention he didn't disappear until November 30, 1977, so you can see the timeline here. But in 1973, they found a lab on the property owned by Dale Elliott, which was Art Williams' right-hand man. And the day they found it, Dale was out in front of the lab, hidden amongst the trees, fanning the product to try and keep it from, as you say, exploding. The authorities came on. This was late in the night, early morning. Surprised him. The young son who was helping him at the time, holding the tray of chemical, jumped, threw the chemical all over the RCMP and himself, and basically just created nothing but chaos for the first hour as they managed to fumigate the place. But that trial went to court. The judge, again, we were drawn in because the judge was Judge Les Cashman, a friend of our family. And he determined that Art had no visible connection, no proven connection with Dale in the manufacturing. It went to trial. Dale was convicted. It went to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada. And the Supreme Court determined that, in fact, the way that the law was written, it did not define what they were producing. The law at that point spoke of assault of MDA, and in fact what they were producing was not assault. So it was overturned, and Dale took advantage of his time back east to get a whole bunch more chemicals ordered and have them shipped out on his return trip. So he was basically just taunting authority. He had no desire for the money other than just to make life comfortable. As I say, he didn't spend it other than his aircraft.
So when he was making this drug, how did he set up his disbursement of it? Because in order to set up the drug, you have to have the demand, number one, but number two, you also have to have people who are willing to go out and sell the product.
Dale Elliott was a member, or let me say an associate of the 101 Knights. And he was a conduit between Art and the distribution network that you're speaking of. The authorities after the 1973 trial felt that they needed to get somebody into Art's system, somebody embedded in his network that could entrap Art, that could find out how he is producing it, how he's trafficking it, and how he is, where his labs are located. And they turned to a fellow that I won't mention his name because he's currently living under witness protection, but in the system he is known as E752, as in Eric 752. And he worked his way into Art's life. And the RCMP provided him with the gel caps that were necessary in order for the authorities to reduce production. They made it impossible for anybody to purchase gel caps in volume. So when this fellow came along with 500,000 gel caps, Art was quite uninterested. Dale could smell a rat. Dale knew this guy there was something fishy about him because he was delivering the gel caps cheaper than what Dale could get them at for cost plus 10% off the mainland. There was a pharmacy in Vancouver area that was providing them 500,000 at a time. He would simply leave them out the back door of the pharmacy, leave a signal in the window, and Dale would pick them up after hours. So Dale knew something was wrong, but Art wanted the product. Art was willing to take the chance. He felt he could outsmart the fellow. But E752 worked his way in. He managed to get some of the product, and he was trafficking it. The RCMP paid with taxpayer money for the product, and when the product was given to the RCMP, they took a small sample, gave the rest of it to E752 in order to distribute on the street. It's estimated he alone made $2.5 million on the sale of MDA, of Art's MDA, using taxpayers' money. But the gross infraction, you might say, of this gentleman was he was a bigger trafficker than Art ever will be. He was bringing in cocaine, marijuana by the boatload, tie sticks, guns, illegal immigrants, and he did it with immunity because the RCMP knew what he was doing, but they didn't want to interrupt the investigation.
So the RCMP basically focused their investigation strictly on Art and were willing to let other criminal activity at that time go in order to pursue this prosecution or potential prosecution. Very much. A fellow by the name of Chester Carey, who was the inspector involved in the actual takedown of 1973, and he was also the handler for E752, stated that there was all kinds of people that would come along like E752. They are a dime a dozen. But it was next to impossible to get the actual source, the manufacturer and the distribution source, as they would with Art Williams. So they were prepared to forgive E752 for all his indiscretions and focus on the one man, Art Williams. Was that because Art had taunted the police for so many years that they focused on him rather than, just trying to take down everybody who was involved at that time? I think you're absolutely right. Art would go out of his way in order to taunt them. There was one particular case where Art was picking up some of his isopherol, it's called. It's one of the principal ingredients in MDA from CPR transport in Nanaimo here. And when Art arrived to pick it up, the RCMP had already exchanged themselves for the people behind the counter. But the fellow behind the counter got a phone call in the middle of his dealings with Art from their main office in Duncan, saying that Art's boys were down in front of the building with two barrels in the back of the car, and they were walking around the RCMP parking lot taking down license plate numbers of every vehicle in the lot. And this fellow that was working in the headquarters at that time was standing in these opaque windows watching all this go on, so he phoned Bob Hawks, was the fellow involved at the CPR terminal, and said, "Hey, it's too late, you've missed him." He says, "No." He said, "I'm just dealing with him right now." So Art would go out of his way to taunt, to confuse, to do whatever he could in order to disrupt the process. He had 6 radios that were tuned into every frequency. They had 6 crystals in each that had every police force, the RCMP, plus some of the western states radio frequencies, and they were listening to the RCMP were doing. They knew well in advance of any raid. And when they finally raided Art's place, in the end they found these radios, and they found them in Dale Elliott's place as well. So the dib was up. They knew what was going on. They were fighting an uphill battle against the man. Now, in your book, 85 Grams, you talked to a number of police officers who worked on this investigation. What were the police going through at this time in order to build this case, and how did they get tipped off on what Art was doing? They received a memo from the U.S. DEA of the day. I don't know. I don't think they were called DEA. Probably just Food and Drug Act or whatever. And this memo was sent to Ottawa, the head office of RCMP, and it was requesting them to follow a shipment that was coming out of the eastern states of isopherol. It was 4 25-pound barrels. And it was destined for a property in Ladysmith on West Down Road, one Art Williams, sorry.
And they followed it. They went to the CPR terminal again for Art to pick up. And they were asked to determine whether or not this BC Institute of Mycology, which was the company Art had established for the production of hybrid mushrooms, was legit. And Bob Hawks, who was involved at that time, he was one of the principals of the RCMP, he followed it. Indeed, the company was there. It had just been registered in the weeks prior. But it sort of waved a red flag because they knew the MDA was reaching the streets of Greater Victoria and the mainland, but they didn't know where it was coming from. And the isoferol, which can be used as a herbicide or for part of a herbicide, it can be used for cosmetics, a number of other purposes, can also be used, as I say, the principal agent of MDA. So he was diverting some of the product he was bringing in to keep his mushrooms legit for the production of the chemical synthetic drug as well. But it took them close to a decade to actually pin him down, to actually find the lab that was crucial. And this was the point that you referred to where Art disappeared.
So were the police shocked to learn that this middle-aged man who had been taunting them for years was their main suspect?
I don't know if shocked is a word. They had a red flag on him from the day that he started taunting the authorities. He never paid income tax from the day he landed in Canada, and he believed that that was a product of the War Measures Act and therefore shouldn't be paid. Refused to pay it. And in fact, he wrote a paper, An Economic War was the headlines, and he sent it off to Pierre Trudeau at that time, our Prime Minister, and that really got everybody's attention at that point. And the RCMP started a file on him. When the shipment started heading towards Art, they just started putting two and two together, believing he was the instrument, the catalyst behind it all, but they just couldn't prove it. You had asked earlier, how did they put the case together? It was just bit and pieces. A lot of it just pure luck. Art had developed a lab up on the east side of Mount Breton, which is right due west of Chemainus, south of Ladysmith. And he and Dale and a couple of others had gone up there and they scouted around and finally found a spot right at the base of a rock outcrop where you couldn't see it. Doesn't matter how close you were, you couldn't see it until you were on top of it. And they built a lab there, and from that point they could see all the way down to the Trans-Canada Highway and where the road took off to come up into the mountain. And they could monitor. They could see when people were coming and going. They knew when they were going to have problems. And at one point, a Forest Service individual had said there's a number of dirt bikes, and it looks like they're being ridden by Art and his crew up into the Mount Breton area. So they suspected something was going on up there. They put a large containment of RCMP members together, and they combed the side of the mountain looking for it. They couldn't find anything. They dressed up as hikers, going up there, trying to follow the dirt bikes as they went in, forestry workers. They couldn't find it. Then funny, one day they were up in the mountain and they heard the dirt bike coming, and they just hid into the bushes, waited for it to go by, and they followed it to the source. And they found a cabin that was the lodging, you might say, for the boys when they were working up on the mountain. But they couldn't get in. The lock system on the front door of the cabin was so intricate, so involved, it was beyond anything they could do to break it. They brought experts over from the mainland. They couldn't break it. And it was only by luck one day when they were up there looking around that the front door was open. It was propped open by a piece of wood. And they saw the inner workings of what, as I say, the housing unit for the boys up there, but the lab was not part of the cabin. One of the days they were up there, they had men again combing the east face of Mount Breton in a grid fashion. They finally got tired and they sat down on this pile of logs, just worn out, and had a smoke, chew their gum, whatever. And Chester Carey, who was the gentleman who was the handler of the E752, was there supervising, and he walked over, and he was disgruntled because these guys aren't using every minute to the best of their ability. Picked up a long broken branch and starts flicking the leaves at the base of this pile of logs. And as he's doing so, the guys are grumbling, and he's saying, well, you know, we haven't looked everywhere. Why are you stopping? And as he did that, the branch that he had in his hand scraped across something metal. And he said, have you thought of looking under the logs that you're sitting on? And lo and behold, they get off, they pull the leaves away from this piece of metal, and here's a vent leading into the lab under a pile of logs that have sat there since the 30s. And Dale Elliott had gone up with a small skill saw and cut his way in and down and created this cave underneath, which they had run a lab in for who knows how long. So, as it is, they decided to come back and put a bug in the top of the lab, a listening device, so they could tell when the MDA was being cooked, when it was getting close to completion, because that would give them an opportunity to rate it. They came up the following day with their technical crew, brought all the equipment up. It was getting late in the day, so they stashed it on the side of the trail with the thought that they'd come back the following day to finish the job. Came back up the following day, carried everything up to the cabin, down to the lab, which was about 200 feet below it, and the lab was no more. Art and his boys had gone up there with a case of dynamite and blown it to smithereens. And this was the way Art was. I mean, he seemed to be 10 steps ahead of the RCMP no matter what they did.
Did he get tipped off to that?
He found cigarette butts, gum wrappers, and footprints that he knew was not his own. The RCMP was not as tidy as Art and the boys were. They took everything out with them that they brought in, and they just gave themselves away.
Wow, sloppy investigation.
Yep, but Art managed to use the wire elsewhere, and he found the listening device humorous, and he ended up taking a picture of himself in front of the demolition, you might say, with holding up a sign for effing pigs, I think it was reading, and this was mounted on his mantle in his house when the RCMP finally took him down.
Well, at least he had a good sense of humor with this as well.
Well, you could look at it from that way. Pretty well everything in their investigation was by fluke when they did find something else. In 1977, they were told by the head office that if they didn't put an end to it, they didn't get enough to charge them with, they were going to shut the investigation down, because it had been millions of dollars, thousands of hours. And at a last-ditch attempt, they decided to raid Dale Elliott's house again. They got there, Dale was not there. His wife told the authorities that he was slept at a neighbor's or a friend's place in Duncan overnight. But in fact, he had heard the RCMP coming up the gravel driveway, and he dove out the bedroom window and took off through the woods. They went over to Art's place. They raided Art. They got him in bed. He was sound asleep. Dragged him out. Went to what was known as the barn, which was a large structure that had been built at the back of Art's property. They'd seen it in 1973, but they didn't know whose property it was on. So they decided to look at it closer. And again, the locks on the doors were just beyond anything they could imagine. The doors were three inches thick, solid wood. There was a stairwell, you might say like a fire escape, hanging from the side of the building, but suspended, and they didn't know how to lower it. And then finally, one of the police must have hit something and it dropped like a ton of bricks, just missing one of the other fellows that were there. Climbed up that to the highest level, which was up in the attic area. Found a door leading into what turned out to be living quarters. It was a 2-bedroom arrangement, Looked like it hadn't been lived in for a long time, lots of dust. They tore that place apart looking for secrets. They couldn't find anything except for a small bag of gel caps up in the rafters. But as they were combing around, one of the officers stubbed his toe on a metal plate which was on the floor. And he moved the plate aside. Again, it's just dumb luck they found it. Moved the plate aside, and there was this shaft that went down 3 stories to the basement. They'd already looked at the basement. One half of it was a workshop, machine shop, and what have you. The other half was the furnace room. They were divided by a concrete block wall. And in one corner of the furnace room was the furnace itself, which was a very large pot-bellied arrangement, and then no other indication of useful space. But when the guy looked down the tunnel, he could see the basement. There was a ladder going all the way down, and he climbed down the ladder, and he was on the reverse side of what appeared to be a steel grate, which covered or enclosed a very narrow passageway leading down the side of this furnace room to the very back of the building. Took his flashlight and proceeded down the narrow passageway, and he came to a room, windowless room. All the walls are blacked out, nothing could be seen, it carried no light, and along one set of walls were these shelves, storage shelves. Didn't make any sense at all. Went back out again and looked at this steel ladder configuration that blocked off the corridor, and noticed that one rung was hinged, and as soon as he lifted the hinge, this ladder fell back against the wall so that you now had access into the furnace room area. Went back out, brought some more guys down. They started looking at this really closely. Got down on their hands and knees, moved the stuff off the shelves. One of the shelves was hinged again. If you lifted it up, the shelf swung away from the wall. And in behind it was a vault door, about 3 foot square. Got a good picture of it in the book. And a lock system on the vault that they couldn't penetrate. Couldn't understand it. They tried everything under the sun. They finally found a couple of probes which looked like picks you would use in a fireplace just to poke the fireplace around. They stuck one in one hole, they turned it, nothing happened. They stuck the other one in another hole, turned it, nothing happened. Finally, they turned the two simultaneously, and this vault door opened. It was 3 inches solid steel. Just inside the door was a bicycle chain. They looked in and up, and there's a shaft that went upwards, and they knew they had found what they were looking for. They could smell it. It smelled like rotten mothballs. They climbed inside and up the chute, and there was Art's hidden lab. All the time they'd been looking for it was right under the nose. And if one wanted to hide themselves, they could pull the vault door closed. Once they were inside, move the bicycle chain, and the shelving unit came back against the wall. From this lab, there was a trap door in the floor, concrete floor, that led into a 18-inch diameter pipe where Art could escape out to the woods behind his property if he chose. On the counter in this lab was a electron microscope that Art had paid $70,000 for back then, and on the microscope or on the table beside it were these opaque gel caps that the RCMP had provided him, and he was looking for a clue. Art was looking for a clue as to why and how they were trying to entrap him. The long and the short of it, they would not have found him, they would not have caught him if it wasn't for a fluke. The main portion of this barn was the legit Institute of Mycology, where the organisms, spores and such for the hybrid mushrooms were being developed. But it was just this little area in the bottom lower corner of the basement, which was concreted in and could not be found come hell or high water unless they tripped upon it from accident. Dale Elliott feels that somebody and he won't mention names, helped them find the keys or the locking probes for this vault door, because he said they were always put inside the furnace up above the door on a ledge. So if you wanted them, you had to reach into the furnace and above, and nobody would have found them. He said, especially if the furnace was working, they were hot as blazes, and he would have to drop them immediately so they could cool down. So they had Art. They finally nailed him. They decided to take him to court. They were going to use everything within their book. Their primary witness was E752. And as it turned out, his ability or his willingness to witness on behalf of the RCMP was compromised. He would turn off the tape recorder that was hidden in his crotch at his convenience when he didn't particularly want them to hear something he was involved in. And when he got into court, he admitted to the defense attorney that he was a bigger trafficker than Art ever was, that the RCMP had paid for him to get a flying license, that he had used some of the millions of dollars that he had earned in order to buy a Bonanza aircraft, which he crashed on Hudson Island, just off of Thetis Island here. And that's a story in itself. He refused to report it, and the feds were asking the RCMP to get him to report the crash. And he refused to do it, literally, so the RCMP reported and filed a report on his behalf. I mean, it was criminal what was going on. But I'm not sure. Did I answer your question? I guess I got a little carried away there.
No, I think I'm just sitting here intrigued. Bazooka Joe, who is in the chat room, he's from the Nanaimo area. And he's just wondering, whereabouts in that Ladysmith, Nanaimo area was his, business found? What section?
It would be South Ladysmith. And at that time, it was outside the township. It was actually in the rural area. If he's aware of Gordon's Trailer Park, it was immediately adjacent to that on the south side.
Mm-hmm. So with that, and considering everything that you just explained, I mean, he was almost playing the police for fools. Like, they were almost like Keystone Cops, where the only time they actually got a break was when something stupid happened.
Regretfully so. Dale, as I mentioned, had bailed out of the back bedroom window in 1977 when the raid went down. And they never did catch him for at least a year and a half. And he had taken off, gone over to Palettes Island, where Gordon Loomis lived, and decided to set up shop in his boat. So he got a friend to bring his boat over. It was a 26-foot wood hull cruiser, and he built a lab under the floorboards using a pump. And for a year and a half, he was producing MDA while Art was looking quite innocent. And the cops couldn't find him. They couldn't track him down. He would come into a shore or a radio or communicate with somebody to pick up the drugs when they were ready. They didn't know where he was. According to the media, the RCMP had received a tip that he was in Lions Bay Marina, north of Vancouver there. But in actual fact, after talking to Dave Staples, the superintendent in charge of the investigation, they had actually been listening to tapes of payphones in Duncan regarding a totally different case. And the fellow that was listening to the tapes late into the evening recognized the voice, and it was Ingrid, Dale Elliott's wife. And then a male voice came on, he recognized it as Dale. And Dale was talking to his wife, and she had gone to this payphone in Duncan, so not to be caught. And they were arranging for a meet at Lions Bay Marina in Vancouver. He had to have conjugal visits, no matter what. That was one of his greatest needs in life. And the RCMP just simply followed her over. Approached him. He had 2 firearms with him at the time, and his son's girlfriend, who was helping him with the boat while he manufactured. And in exchange for him pleading guilty to the 1973 charge and leaving it at that and not charging the girlfriend at all or the firearms. They accepted his plea, and he did 9 years as a result of that. But they wouldn't have got him if it wasn't for a fluke.
I mean, I have a lot of respect for the RCMP, but it just seemed like maybe back then they weren't prepared for this type of kingpin in this type of drug movement or drug trade.
They weren't. Their office was on the corner of Vancouver and Fort in Victoria, and it was a space about 500 square feet, and there was 6 fellows or individuals in there, officers in there, and they shared a stapler. There was 2 desks, and that's all they had going for them. And they had put together a team which involved 2 of each of the other police detachments in the Greater Victoria area, and that's all they had going for them at all in order to counteract all crime, at least major crime. That was their forte. So they were stretched. When they had to follow Art, when they had to put surveillance out there, they were stretched. There was no such thing as the eavesdropping systems they have today. Dave Staples showed me the tape recorder that he used in order to plug into D.L. Elliott's house and into Art Williams' house. And he would get somebody to shimmy up the power pole out in front of their place in broad daylight, hook up a couple of alligator clips to his telephone line, then run the line to the neighbor's property. And in Dale's case, they set up shop in a camper on the fellow's property across the road. In Art's place, they rented a mobile home in the Gordon's trailer park. And they set up shop there just so they could listen to the telephone conversations. But nothing was ever really revealed in those conversations. They just got no evidence other than what they could find themselves or what E752 was able to provide them.
Did Art have any police working for him? That way he was able to stay so ahead of the game when it came to the investigation against him? Because everything you have stated tonight almost sounds to me like he had somebody tipping him off.
Not to my knowledge. Now, I do know that the RCMP shared a building in Duncan with the fire department. And one of the fellows on the fire department, or it was a volunteer fire department, was a close friend of Art's. And this fellow told me that they would have parties periodically within the building. Everybody would get hammered out of their minds. The RCMP would socialize, and when they were drunk and out of their minds, this fellow would slip upstairs into the RCMP office and look through the files and check on Art's file to see what they had, who was dealing with them, and so on and so forth. So Art had his input. Not unlike the Hells Angels today. They have people, perfectly positioned in most every civic outlet you can imagine. So they know what's going on. But nobody really was working for Art that was carrying a badge. Not in the least.
That actually surprises me a little bit, because you think with his ego and knowing how much money he had from this, that it would have been probably a great scenario for him.
It might have been. He might have been able to buy somebody, but I don't believe his ego allowed him. I believe he was better in his mind than any of the RCMP, any of the judicial system. When he went to court, he hired the best lawyer he could, which was Sid Simons out of Vancouver. This was for the 1977 trial. And he kept insisting to Sid how the trial was going to be run. He would go home and study until the wee hours of the morning, then phone Sid up and say, do this, do that, and the other thing. And Sid was just hamstrung most of the time from conventional means of fighting the case. Art had a very high opinion of himself. I should mention at this point, one of the trips that Art made over to Vancouver to meet with his lawyer, Sid, was the night of, or the day of November 30, 1977, and he never made it home. He left Vancouver. Sid watched him take off. The fog was rolling in. The cloud level was at 1,000 feet. He went out about 20 minutes from Vancouver. Sorry, I just had to have a drink there. My throat's getting a little parched. And the Vancouver radar tower noticed that Art was in a circle pattern. And they asked him what the problem was, and he said, my location device was acting up. He had just got the plane out of servicing. It had its 100-hour service the day before. And according to June Harrison, the lady that was responsible for the company that did the service, she said there was nothing wrong with his gauges. They were just fine. But anyways, the traffic controller was watching this blip, and it became a smaller and smaller circle, and finally just a dot, to which he deduced that the plane had crashed. So he put the signal out. The hovercraft from Vancouver went out looking for it. It was on site within 20 minutes. Coast Guard came out. U.S. military had, their Navy had a ship in the area, and plus a number of aircraft. And they found a seat out of a Cessna. They found a front wheel off a Cessna, a number of logbooks, 2 chocks, which are used to brace the wheels when the thing is parked, and a little bit of insulation. The Coast Guard captain stated that if he had known so little was going to be found, he would never have bothered showing up. Margaret Williams wanted the authorities to send down the Pisces in order to confirm that the aircraft was on the bottom of the water. It was in 700 feet of water. And they refused to spend the $20,000 to do that. They just wanted it to go away. But they concluded he had crashed. Now, the interesting part about this is 3 months prior to his disappearance, he had flown in the same aircraft with Don Bohin, his friend and lawyer, to Belize. They crisscrossed the states down to Florida, fueled up, and took a course across the northern edge of Cuba through Cuban airspace to Grand Cayman, and then from there down to Belize. As they were going across the Cuban airspace, they'd already got approval. They were all in place. Cuban controller came on, said hold, go into a circle pattern. They did so. In the process of doing that, 2 MiGs came up and started flapping their wings at them, trying to get them to go down, to which Art refused. And it became a bit of a dogfight. Art not willing to go down, one of the MiGs got out in front of him and poured on his afterburners and dumped fuel all over the front of Art's plane and then tried to light him up. And Art just put it into a nosedive and took it right down to 100 feet off the deck, and then flew back to Florida 100 feet off, knowing that these MiGs couldn't touch him. And he could see them up above him floating around. But that was sort of an example of his flying ability, number one. He's not going to get lost in a 20-minute flight from Vancouver. He went down a second time and managed to get to Belize. This was the time that we believe he was completing his business arrangements. He had Don Bohin with him at that time as well, plus Don's girlfriend. And it's my opinion that he went back down there. I have audio tapes that were recorded between E752 and Art, of Art speaking and telling E752 how he was flying. Art was flying below the radar to Vashon Island in the Puget Sound, and never once being contained or caught or apprehended by the U.S. And he would just shut off his transponder and go in at 50 feet off the deck. My calculations is from the point that his plane became a dot on the radar, he could be well into Washington by the time the authorities even showed up on the crash site.
Do you think it was a real crash site, or maybe he just in that circle was dumping gear that he could maybe carry in the plane at that point?
Well, that's an interesting thing because you're coming up with conclusions that the authorities didn't come up with. The authorities stated for the media that the front wheel was damaged, that the structural member of it was torn, and it was rusted. June Harrison from Victoria Flying Services did the servicing on the plane, also saw the wheel. She said it was not damaged. The screws that hold it into place were not torn. The authorities said that the serial number on the wheel matched his plane. I contacted Cessna headquarters, and they said they don't put serial numbers on the wheel. They'll put part numbers, and those part numbers are universal with any Cessna. So that went out the window. When I purchased it was called a Hawk XP.
Right.
He was too short to see over the windshield, so he took out the seat and put in an actuating seat for himself so he could raise himself up to look over. Here's the seat that they found.
I'm going to get you to hold on right there because we're going to hop out for a break. We're going to talk about the crash and the disappearance of drug czar Art Williams with the author of 85 Grams, Daryl Ashby. We got another half an hour left with Daryl on this True Crime Monday night. And talking Art Williams, then Everett Thiemer from The Encounter will be with us as well. Don't forget, tickets are on sale now for the first annual Caribou Paracon. You can get them at questers.ca right now. Highly suggest you do. We'd love to meet as many Spaced Out Radio listeners up here for September 28th through 30th. Come on up. We'll be back with more Spaced Out Radio right after this.
Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
Find yourself constantly looking up in the sky, looking for answers? Have you had extraterrestrial contact? Are you an abductee? Looking for answers to your experiences? Hi there, I'm R. Keith Andrews, Spaced Out Radio's resident ET expert. Join me live the first Friday of every month where I take questions from the Spaced Out Radio chat room and help you understand those from the far-off world. It's 2 hours of knowledge every experiencer should listen to. Hope to see you there.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Are you an experiencer? Have you had run-ins with strange creatures you can't explain? ETs, Dogman, Bigfoot, werewolves? They're enough to scare the daylights out of anyone. Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski from your 4-Cop. And on the last Monday of every month, you can listen to me and the host, Dave Scott, talk about the weird and the strange being reported on Spaced Out Radio. I'm going to bring my investigations and sources, you bring your experiences, and we'll figure out the rest together. Strange Days on Spaced Out Radio. Come tune us in at spacedoutradio.com.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
You know, it's hard being the bad man of ufology, but that's just the way that I like it. This is Chris George Zuger, and I'll be hanging out with Dave Scott and SOR scientist Chris Cogswell for Reality Paranormal, the second Wednesday of every month. And our job is to break it down and come to conclusions as to what is really going on in the supernatural world. I'd love for you to join us and bring your questions for us to investigate right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
When it comes to the news, we look for the stories that the mainstream won't cover. Welcome to Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter. This is News Director Everett Thiemer. The Encounter is about the weird and strange stories that occur daily, and we scour the world looking to bring them to you. You can hear me with Dave Scott every Monday through Friday in our Encounter news segment. Read us online at spacedoutradio.com or check us out and give our Facebook page a like at SOR The Encounter. So come give The Encounter a read.
From the mile-high state of Colorado, sharing our signal around the world, I invite you to Spaced Out Sundays. Hi, I'm Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm closing out the week by taking you on a paranormal journey to the world of the weird. Ghosts, aliens, psychic phenomena, I will hit it all in your questions too. So let us highlight the paranormal for you. So come join me for Spaced Out Sundays starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio, and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio. Tonight, I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, we have Geraldine Orozco back with The Spiritual You. It happens the first Tuesday of every month as we get into the spiritual Zen side of the show and the month. We get going at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern time at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome back everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network, including Deep Talk Radio. And don't forget, all of our archives are free. We store them on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. We'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Fizbataki. Fizbataki is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, we have a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to Bumblefoot, shop at our store, read up on the encounter online, and so much more. Tonight we are talking, for the final time, we introduce Daryl Ashby. He is the author of a book called 85 Grams that you can find on Amazon. I think you should get this book. What an intriguing tale of an unsolved Canadian crime from a drug czar named Art Campbell, who did all of his business on Vancouver Island back in the 1970s. Daryl, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Can I just sort of make mention that it's not Art Campbell, but Art Williams?
Oh, I'm sorry, Art Williams.
No worries. I just don't want somebody going looking for the wrong book.
That, you know what? I got confused there, and I apologize.
You're allowed.
I apologize. That is my fault. Bad host.
Hardly.
Nonetheless, right before the break, you were talking how Art had disappeared over the Georgia. I'm going to assume that would have been the Strait of Georgia.
It was right opposite Tsawwassen Ferry Terminal.
Okay, yeah. So here he is flying his plane in a circle, and all of a sudden everything seems to go wrong, and his plane, so-called, crashes. However, we don't know if that was actually his plane that crashed into the strait, which is connected to the Pacific Ocean. Take us through the fact that Art just seemed to up and disappear.
A matter of weeks prior to his disappearance, he had spoken to Gordon Loomis's daughter, who was the chief chemist at the Mycology Institute that Art had operated on his property. And he had told her that if somebody wants to disappear, the only way they can do it is they have to leave behind, forsake, walk away from wife, family, and friends without a second thought. Why he would say such a thing at that moment in time, I don't know. I do know from talking to Dale Elliott, his right-hand man, and some of the other fellows involved, that he was putting into effect an escape for all of them. They were going to get a large boat and they were going to go down to Belize and start again. Everybody had gotten their passports the day before he disappeared. That would be the 29th of November 1977. He spoke to Dale Elliott and he told him that we need to sort this out. And Dale said, we'll do it tomorrow. And tomorrow didn't come. But the authorities would just like to see the subject disappear. They weren't getting any satisfaction. According to Sid Simon, Art Williams, big lawyer from the mainland, he could have won the case. The case was easily winnable. The fact that they had used E-752 to entrap Art would have thrown all that testimony out, and that's the only thing they had going for them. The fact that they had found his lab and evidence of MDA within the lab could be considered circumstantial or, of little benefit because it wasn't actually MDA, but rather a trace of it. So he really didn't need to run away, but in my opinion, that's exactly what he did.
Do you think he just got tired of the game, or do you think he moved his operation somewhere else?
Well, there's a number of theories on that as well. There is suggestions that he was paid by the federal government just to disappear. There's suggestions that he was put under witness protection himself and just assumed a new identity elsewhere. But none of that can be corroborated with anybody, regretfully.
When Art disappeared, what was the attitude amongst his friends? Did they ever hear from him? Did they all think he was dead? Did he go cold turkey, or did everybody just kind of think that he just disappeared and moved on with his life and maybe, just cut everybody off because he had just had enough? Because in my opinion, just listening to you, in my opinion, it doesn't sound like he actually died in some sort of plane crash. And he would have obviously knew that radar only goes so low. Especially back then. It was interesting. I was looking at a reading of Vancouver Sun back in 1977, and a Russian spy plane actually flew over the east coast of the States and into the States a short distance and back out again undetected. So even the U.S., with their great technology, was unable to detect an aircraft below a certain level. And it's not been until the last 20 plus years that they've got the facilities here on the coast in order to pick up small pleasure craft, planes that are low flying. It was just not possible in Art's day. So do you think he went below radar? Where would he have flown? Maybe to another island in Washington State? Because, let's take it. People today may be forgetting that back then in the 70s, it was pretty easy to forge identification. In the 3 months prior to Art's disappearance, he had already established a route to Belize. On 2 separate trips, he had crisscrossed the states, stopping at flight clubs rather than full-on airports where customs would be required. And he knew how to get out of the area. I don't believe he went to a small island. I believe he just made his journey down, got out of Dodge, as you say, as quick as possible. But with the ID, it would have been easy to take over another identification, take over another identity. Well, this is true. His girlfriend, Shirley Ferguson, had found a passport in their bedroom prior to his disappearance in the name of Howard. It had his picture, wasn't Art's name, and she inquired of him what it was all about, and he told her it was none of her business. It was nothing that she needed to know about. So I guess he had been able to fabricate another identity. The interesting part about this, though, is when Art disappeared, later on, within the next year and a half, his first wife, Margaret, disappears as well. That's very true. Do you think there was a connection between the two? Well, again, there's the theories. My friends living across the road said that after Margaret had disappeared, a plane had buzzed their house. In other words, buzzed Art's old house, which was the customary thing that Art would do when he was wanting to be picked up at the airport. They just thought nothing of it, went back to sleep. And then all of a sudden, everything was an inferno. There was fire trucks coming from every which direction. They looked across, and Margaret's house was in flames. The barn, the large structure at the back where the lab was in flames, and it was torched. And they feel that he just dumped a Molotov out the window onto these buildings and kept on going. In reality, a fellow named by the name of Ray Ridge, who was the muscle behind Art, had torched them, trying to rid everybody of a little booklet that Art had kept
record of everybody and every involvement they had, because they didn't want that to be in the hands of the authorities. Art had done this in the anticipation that somebody would turn against him at some point. But everything just burnt to the ground. But Margaret had disappeared by this time. This was only a week or so afterward. And everybody had felt, well, the authorities had felt, that she had gone to be with Art. They had put a fellow by the name of Fitzgerald in charge of the investigation. He didn't do anything for the first month because it was considered a missing persons. A fellow known to the family and had been in Margaret's company for quite a bit since Art disappeared was parked on the property the night she disappeared. And I've spoken to him, and I asked him, because people had pointed the finger at him, I asked him point blunt if he was involved in her disappearance, and he didn't deny it. According to a number of people who knew Art, the group involved with him, there was a well dug on Ray Ridge's brother's property in North Cowichan, 20 feet deep. They needed a step ladder to get down into it, an extension ladder. And within a day of Margaret's disappearance, that well was filled in. I accused this particular individual of her being down there. His remarks to me was, he is surprised that the authorities have not dug the well up. He said, in fact, you'd probably find 3 sets of bones in that well. Well, I've been to the RCMP. I've presented them with everything that I have found, motive, individual, location of her remains, and they do not want to be involved. They do not want to go in and dig it up. I had hired Brenda Clark, who's a forensic anthropologist from University of Victoria, to use her students, her graduate students, to do a dig. I had got the approval of the owners of the property to allow us to go on and do the dig. I was going to finance it. Dave Staples, now retired, had gained the help of Scotty Gardner, who was in charge of E Division, to join him, and they were going to supervise it so it was done properly. Dave Staples went to head office in Victoria and told them what we were doing. They told him if we do dig and we find anything and touch it, we will be charged with tampering with evidence. The following day, I got a call from the property owners, and they had retracted their permission to go on the land. So, I don't know. I believe she was murdered. According to another party, she had entered into agreement with the fellow who was at her home the night she disappeared to use $90,000 that she had been holding to finance a load coming up from down south. And according to this fellow, the load went sideways. She didn't believe it. She threatened to expose him. There's your motive.
So you don't think that she followed him to reunite that romantic relationship in a different country?
I wish I could believe that. No, I believe she was murdered. I believe her remains are in the well. And I believe if that well was dug up expertly, there'd be some indication, whether it be a cigarette butt, chewing gum, bloody shirt, or what, in that well along with her, that would lead them to who did it through DNA. But nobody will dig it.
Why do you think the authorities are turning their back on this potential breaking of this case? Or maybe the start of another criminal investigation?
I don't know, but I think that could bring you back to some of your earlier questions. Did they finance the disappearance of Art? Were they involved in the drug trade at some point? E752 states that the story of Art William is only the prologue to the real story. And he's a fascinating man to listen to.
In your thoughts, then, did Art survive?
Yes.
And you believe he's in Belize, or, like, we don't know. I mean, he's most likely dead now. Or he would be in his 90s.
This coming December. His birthday's December 24th. His sister, who's 18 months younger is still alive and living in Vancouver. That's Gladys. So he's got good genes. He's a stubborn man. He didn't live a reckless life when it came to drinking, tobacco, or what have you. I think he could be alive. I would love to be financed to follow the financial trail.
Has she ever given up whether or not her brother Art made it?
Yeah, she believed he died in the crash. I presented her with a photograph of a gentleman by the name of Tom Howard. Interesting name, isn't it? From Costa Rica, actually, who, if you do a line graph with all of Art's pictures and this Tom Howard's pictures, there are 26 points of reference which are identical. And this fellow would be of the same age bracket as Art would be. There's other things such as the crossing of the legs, the cigarette in the right hand versus the drink in the left hand, the aviation glasses hanging from his pocket, a lot of different things that Art was known for. So, in answer to your question, yes, I believe Art definitely escaped, started again, lived out his retirement years.
Do you think the family kept hush on it just to keep the publicity away? Because obviously when you're that type of a kingpin, making millions of dollars, you do think about taking care of your family. You do think about making sure that even though you're doing all the illegal work, that they're also having a good life too.
He had taken care of the family in so much that he had provided money for their well-being. Regretfully, Margaret used it to finance an operation. She wanted to be Art when Art disappeared. She wore his clothes, wore his boot, walked like him, and she was just beyond her pay grade when it came to actually pulling it off. So there went the means by which these others could subside. Shirley Ferguson's alive and well today and living in the Chemainus area. God bless her soul if she's listening. But she is living by no means in a prosperous way.
What do you think Art did with his money then?
Well, as I say, he had given Margaret a certain amount, where she had an ice cream bucket in her wood pile. That would be a substantial amount today. The $90,000 that he gave to a guy by the name of Guy Antilla to distribute between Margaret and Shirley if he disappeared, actually fell into Margaret's hands because Guy was leaving town. On the understanding that Margaret would deal with it properly. It was put down a well at the back of the property, and Shirley noticed it disappeared 2 weeks prior to Margaret's disappearance. There was $90,000 taken and given to Gordon Loomis down in Desert Hot Springs. There was money buried in a property in South Wellington that Art and Margaret owned, and the fellow that purchased the property was removing stumps and actually hit it with a plow or a till, and he said there was just currency flying all over the place. So there was enough added value there that if it was of today's value, it'd be well over $500,000. No reason for anybody to be uncomfortable. But he did have the belief that if he was going to be evade authorities, he had to leave everybody without as much as a kiss goodbye. And he did.
Was his inner circle small in order to walk away from such people, or did he just have everybody believing in him and supporting him that even if he did call from Belize or Mexico or Costa Rica, wherever he may have ended up, do you think that because the police thought he was dead in a plane crash, that they would have been even trying to track those names or phone numbers that called into family members or friends?
I can pretty well assure you that he never called anybody. His tight circle of friends, as you say, is really two people. That was Dale Elliott and Ray Ridge. He had others that he trusted, and some of them knew what was going on, but they weren't involved on a day-to-day basis. He walked away. That's the bottom line.
Why do you think the RCMP, as we got time running out here, we only got about 5.5 minutes left with you tonight in a show that's just flown on by, Daryl. Why do you think the RCMP have wanted to wash their hands of this?
I think it's an embarrassment, to be honest with you. The fact that he was able to outsmart them, that he was able to always be one step ahead of them. I don't know. I've spoken to all the higher echelons of the RCMP, and without fail, every one of them has a strong level of admiration for Art Williams as a brilliant wizard, as a brilliant man. Whether it was their duty to apprehend him or not, they still had this respect. And I believe that the system just had enough of him. Now that he's gone, he's not coming back. They don't want to talk about him again.
So to them, the case is closed. He died in the Strait of Georgia or maybe the Strait of Juan de Fuca, pardon me, between the coastal town of Tawasin and Vancouver Island.
Well, they say it's closed, but when I go to sit down in their office and ask them for information, they say it's an ongoing investigation. Same with Margaret. I asked for information on her family so I could get the DNA from the family so I could match it to what we found in the well. And they said, no, can't help you. It's an ongoing investigation. That was 1979. Well, I don't know how long ongoing investigations go on without doing anything, but that's the excuse you're using.
I mean, we're going on 40 years here of some very much unsolved crime.
Yep.
Do you think that the RCMP are, as you say, embarrassed by this, and that's the reason why they won't close the case, is because it was so bungled from the beginning and really did make them look like Keystone Cops?
I believe they don't close the case officially because they don't want to have to release anything. I've gone through Freedom of Information and it's gone nowhere. I've spoken to everybody all the way up the chain in E Division, and it's going nowhere. When I go in there with a request for information, they hand me the lowest person on the totem pole, and I'm just being shelved off. And the funny part about it is this one lady, the first one I got, I said, you're just basically being shelved this, aren't you? I'm being toyed with and basically hopeful that I'll just go away. She says, yeah. She was 8.5 months pregnant. She was out of there. She wasn't going to be following up on this. So it's a case that I don't think will ever be resolved. Margaret Williams, I don't think will ever be resolved, which is a shame because I think she deserves closure.
Most innocent people who go missing definitely do, especially for their families who are still wondering. Being that she was First Nations, has her family been a little bit more tight-lipped about this because of the way the police really didn't seem to care? Or
no, I don't know. I haven't been in contact with her family because nobody will provide me with the information. I put a broadcast out there 10 years ago with all the information about Margaret into the Alberta area where she came from, Edson, Alberta, looking for a relative that would remember her, that would want to touch base. I spoke to Art's nephew a few weeks ago, and he was stating that he contacted the family after Margaret's disappearance, and the family told him to leave it alone. Don't touch it. Let it go. And they wouldn't cooperate with him whatsoever. So I don't know.
Wow. Daryl Ashby, I want to say thank you for coming on Spaced Out Radio tonight, and let's stay in touch, because if anything ever breaks on this case, I definitely want to know more, man. I do. This has been so much fun for me. And I think our audience, too. Do me a favor. Could you tell everybody where they can get your book, 85 Grams?
The simplest way to get it is through Amazon.com. As Dave has indicated, you can get it from chapters.ca. It's available in Kindle, in Nook, Kobo. The local bookstores in the Nanaimo Ladysmith area carry it. But and if you wanted to contact us, we send you a copy by all means. And you can just go on to our website, www.85gramsartwilliams.com, and you can see an ongoing dissertation there with information that isn't in the book, photographs that's not in the book. Be happy to hear from anybody. Dave, this has been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being.
Oh, it's been so much fun. I love this. And you know what? It's rekindled my yearning to do a little bit more true crime and unsolved crime on this show. And this is something that I'm going to have to take a look at for future programming. But Daryl, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate your time. And good luck with your research. I hope you get the answers that you need, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Coming up, Everett Themer and the Encounter.
This is the winter of our lives. We come to play the final scene. The curtains closing in the darkness we expose what lies beneath.
We are entering the Encounter on a brand new week tonight with Everett Themer as we take a look around the world at the news of the day. The news is always changing, and that's why we bring you the Encounter. And don't forget, you can find all of our news on Facebook.com/SOR The Encounter as we prep our new look website for a brand new news section. Our news director, Everett Themer, how's your hair looking tonight, my friend?
I'm pulling a little bit of it out.
I bet. Why?
It's been. I want to be out there playing with my chainsaw.
I don't blame you. There's nothing more manly than wearing plaid and using a chainsaw. It's true. It's totally true. My friend, I got to tell you, before we get into the Encounter, Daryl Ashby tonight, okay, Canadian author, talking about Art Williams, this drug czar who just disappeared. This has really, really made me realize how much I miss true crime on this show.
And I can understand why. I love some of these true crime stories, and that was a really interesting one.
It was. It absolutely was. I got to start looking into this more because, you know, when you're a one-man show, there are so many diverse topics out there that sometimes you just forget. And this is one of those topics that I've just stupidly forgotten. And I had so much fun with this show. You know, like I could picture it. Like he was telling such a good picture. I could picture what he was saying in my head. And I'm like, wow, this is actually kind of cool.
That's the kind of story you want to lay in bed with the lights off and just listen and be a little bit afraid and a little bit curious and just learn and want to learn even more.
Yeah, we're definitely going to do a little bit more. Actually, believe it or not, next Monday we actually have another true crime coming up. Piu Eatwell is going to come in. She's a European author, but she's done an incredible book on the Black Dahlia.
I love that case.
Yeah, that one's going to be fun. That one's going to be a lot of fun.
And that kind of encompasses everything. I mean, there's ghost stories around that. There's mystery. There's so much. There's so much around that case that is really fascinating.
My friend, we're going to change topics right now because I know that we are going to get into heavy debate over the main topic du jour on the Encounter right now. And I'm not sure where I know you stand on this, but I sure as hell know where I stand. Break down what's happening with Alex Jones.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, Alex Jones has had a pretty bad month. It started last week when defense attorneys in one of his defamation cases asserted his defense as no reasonable person would take the statements from Alex Jones as fact. And then Alex Jones woke up this morning to first having Apple remove his outlets from their platform. And then he was quickly banned by YouTube, Facebook, and Spotify. So he has been essentially censored on all but Twitter in the social media universe.
Wow. You know, I'll be the first one to say, and I have trumpeted on this show, that I think Alex Jones is a fearmonger. I'm not a fan of his. Not a fan of the way he conducts interviews or over embellishes. I think I've been pretty rude on him. All right. And not a fan. I was having a power thought, and I kind of, when your brain just kind of hits pause, that's what happened. He, in my opinion, at the beginning had the power when people stopped trusting the mainstream media and were turning to the alternative. He had the power and the resiliency and the attitude and the magnitude to take the alternative media and blow it up for something good. And I don't like what he did with it. All right? But I can tell you this. Even though I'm not a fan of his, Everett, I do have to disagree wholeheartedly with these platforms that have taken his information off. I don't like that. I think it's scary for any media outlet to have everything dispersed, taken off, washed away, deleted, much like a terrorist organization. I don't like that. That scares me.
Part of me agrees with you completely. And there's a part of me that, while I'm not a fan of Alex Jones, I have to disagree with you. And what I think people need to realize is that while he's been removed from these platforms, nobody is infringing on his free speech. He still has, at this point, the right to use Twitter. He still has his websites. He can do what he wants personally. But when he submits his content to these companies, whether you agree with it or not, they are claiming he is violating their terms of service in terms of what he is saying and the ideas that he is putting out there. The thing is that let's look at these platforms as book publishers. You have the right to write any book you want, and you can submit it to any publisher you want. But in the end, they have the right to decline publishing your material. And that's very much in line with what these platforms have done.
Mm-hmm. I understand that, and I can appreciate that. Okay. And for the most part, I agree with you. We're all in a public forum using a private platform. As weird as that may sound, that's exactly what we're doing. Whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we don't own those platforms. They just allow us to be stupid on there.
And we do that well.
Exactly. I mean, who would have thought taking pictures of food dishes would have taken off the way it did? But nonetheless, okay, I understand where they have the ability to control that. But what's good for the goose is also good for the gander as well. And I think he is being, and it kills me to say this because I am so not a fan of his. Okay? It still kills me to say this, but the way they are singling him out, okay, the way they are singling him out, when there are people on both sides of the political ledger doing pretty much the exact same thing that are not being banned, some even being promoted, i.e. the New York Times, it's disgusting. It is disgusting. So to me, I see these social media sites now completely saying, we'll give you freedom of speech. You have to abide by the terms, but we're going to determine what freedom of speech for you is. And I don't like that.
That's kind of the road I was going to suggest we go down for a minute, because could this be a situation where social media platforms are using Alex Jones as an example, as a way to kind of reinforce to other media personalities, do it this way or be removed from our platform? Can they be using him as sort of a public example because he is kind of, I mean, you have to admit that he is one of the biggest voices in alternative to fear-mongering media.
Yes.
So maybe they are using him, as an example, saying, this is what we expect, and if it gets violated, you're done.
I understand that, and I can appreciate that. Okay? I can totally appreciate that. With him, though, and like I said, I'm going to preface this again, I'm not a fan. I don't like the fact that I'm actually on here feeling sorry for him right now and his millions of dollars that he has taken by the fear-mongering he has promoted to people.
Yeah, that has to sting a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It doesn't feel good off the tongue. It doesn't feel as good as the tequila I was drinking last night with neighbor Tony before he moved.
But his fans and his legions are still more than welcome to go to his website and view his content.
I understand that. And, the web is something different. I mean, what's next? I mean, can he be pulled off the web? Radio stations and television stations, or more so radio stations, are not going to drop him. He's too much money. They may not agree with the message, but they're not going to drop him. He brings in too much money.
And what's that say, though? What does that say about the way people consume media and what they're looking for?
I realize there is always a yeah, but in every situation. All right? But I'm going to throw this one up. Sarah Young just made one of the newest members of the New York Times editorial board. Okay. Some of her grotesque tweets allow her to stay on social media.
This is true.
So what is the difference between what she is saying compared to what Alex Jones was saying? Why are we defining a difference here? All right. Is it because she's a woman? Is it because she is of Asian descent?
It's a good question.
Right. And this is what bothers me, though, Everett. This is why I hate the fact that I am defending Alex Jones as much as I can't stand the guy, because I think he is everything wrong that journalism, or everything wrong with journalism today, can be wrapped into Alex Jones.
Well, he has not been banned as of yet on Twitter.
Not yet, but how long?
I don't know. And maybe that would be an argument for the Alex Jones fans. If he gets banned and these other, these other Twitter users with their hate speech, maybe that's where they can begin their argument. It really depends on what perspective and what argument the companies use for their suspensions or bans or removal. because if you do read their terms of services,
yes,
which
I
most
that.
people don't.
I understand that. I totally do. Sarah Jiang, okay? Are white people genetically predisposed to burn faster in the sun, thus logically being only fit to live underground like groveling goblins?
I would classify that as very close to hate speech.
Hashtag cancel white people. To quote her on another tweet, white men are bullshit. 2, no one cares about women. 3, you can threaten anyone on the internet except cops. I mean, this is some of the harassment that she has been putting out.
And maybe when she begins to face the backlash that Alex Jones has been facing, maybe she will face sanctions somewhere. Maybe she will be, maybe she will lose her job. We don't know what's going to happen in that case. I think we need to, at this point in time, look at it on a case-by-case basis, because you can argue.
I agree.
You can argue that Alex Jones, I mean, he's come out and said in previous defenses that he is essentially not a journalist. He's a character or a caricature. Now, that doesn't justify the things that he says.
Oh, absolutely.
But what it does do is it takes him out of the realm of being compared with something like that or someone like that.
Absolutely. And you know what? There's a couple of tweets out here that make perfect sense, and I agree with them. Okay. How many, A-hole skeptic on Twitter, how many families of murdered children has she terrorized? I agree with you. I fully agree with you. All right. Alex Jones is not a good citizen. Not a good citizen whatsoever. Mike B. Okay, this is not a both sides issue. New York Times does actual journalism. Alex Jones peddles blatant propaganda and snake oil. I agree. I absolutely agree. And he brings up the point that YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, they're all private companies. They can do what they want. Absolutely, they can. But at what point, and I'm not saying this to cause controversy, just so we can think that there are two sides. And like I said, I'm not a fan of Jones. Not a fan whatsoever. And I understand where people are saying, you know what, it's not free speech on a private forum, which is what the social media companies are. But it's still,
and that is 100% correct.
But it's still the fact. I mean, take Sarah Jiang out of that. Okay, look at, I'm not going to get into the CNN versus Fox debate. Okay, but let's take The View. Look at all the harassing comments people like Rosie O'Donnell or Whoopi Goldberg have made. The famous picture of Whoopi Goldberg at a Trump protest showing a T-shirt of Trump blowing his brains out with a gun. That's your president. Whether you like it or not, that's still you don't have to like Trump, but you still have to respect the seat.
Bringing that up, it's funny. Granted, it's a little bit different, but look at what she faced versus what Kathy Griffin faced when she did
Absolutely.
her poorly planned satire of harming Trump. We'll put it that way.
I
mean, while the cases are somewhat similar, the backlash was entirely different.
I agree with you. But Kathy Griffin hasn't stopped either, and they've stopped picking on her.
Yeah, but honestly, I hate to say it, is she relevant anymore?
I mean, she's still on the D list.
She's always been on the D list, but I mean, you don't see her shows anymore. She's not on. What was she on the last time? Entertainment Network. So she's suffered.
Absolutely.
It's not for you or I or anybody else to decide. I guess if she suffered enough, but then you compare that to Whoopi Goldberg, who, in a way, basically just got some
publicity out of this, and while there's been a little bit of backlash, there hasn't been anything career-ending.
Absolutely. Char points out that T-shirt was fake, Dave. Whoopi did not wear that shirt, and if it was fake, I do apologize.
Okay, I haven't heard that yet.
Okay, I hadn't heard that either. But nonetheless, all right, these companies have the right to block him. They do. They're private companies, private shareholders, but I want to see somebody on the other side. As we stay down the middle, I want to see somebody from the other side, get it as well. Because that's what it comes down to. And let's face it, Alex Jones, character or not, as defined by his lawyers, Everett, I think is going to be the poster boy for this, but it's got to be even. If you're doing it to him, you have to do it to other people. So when people like Sarah Young post tweets such as dumbass effing white people marking up the internet with their opinions like dogs pissing on fire hydrants, something like that should be taken pretty seriously as well.
Well, let me ask you this then. If Alex Jones, who is known, he gets his information or his points across through stunts, hyping things up. He's a bit brash.
Mm-hmm.
If he put forth the same points and the same ideas in a different manner, do you think he would have been banned for hate speech?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's say he did it in a Ted Koppel sort of style, or a more low-key journalistic style. Do you think he would have been removed from the platforms?
I have no idea. I really don't know. Tim on Twitter Twitter shows you I'm always thinking like a man. Okay, Tim on Twitter says, from Deep Talk Radio, he says, if the internet becomes a utility, someday does that make these platforms public instead of private?
I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't think so, because you can go back and look at the old phone system, the old landlines. While it was a public utility, in many cases, it was private companies that were providing service to local areas.
Mm-hmm. I do want to mention something because Mr. Skeptic, he brings up a very good point too. Okay, because I mentioned about, respect the seat in the presidency. And let's face it, this all started, okay, let's ruffle the rest of the feathers. Why not? This also all started, with the way things started with the Obama presidency, right? And the way that was disrespected too. You can say whether or not it was because he was black, whether it was because he was a Democrat, whether it was because he was, just loathed by the conservatives for whatever reasons. I don't know. I'm an outsider on this one. I'm a total outsider on this. All right. From this point of view, from a Canadian point of view, he seemed like an all right guy. Right. But
do you think? Oh, go ahead.
All I'm saying is this isn't just a Trump thing or a Democrat and Republican thing. This is something that has been going back, and we got to call it fairly. This is something that has been going back since the Obama administration. And this is what it is built up to with this ugliness that we see today.
And do you think that that's just sort of a societal evolution? It's very easy to be a bully behind a keyboard, and it's very easy to disparage the president or write a horrible article and put it out there somewhere and have it spread virally. It's very easy to do all of that. Do you see this as maybe just sort of an evolution? It just keeps going and going.
I mean, Alex, let's face it. The crap that he pulled with Sandy Hook, Okay? Harassing the families, going up to family members who had buried their children. Okay, whether you think Sandy Hook was a conspiracy or not is irrelevant. The fact that, I will say this. When I started reading into Sandy Hook, I thought, wow, there might be something to this. But then as a father, it also kicked up too in looking at parental emotions, in studying it. And you're a father too, Everett. There are times where we as dads or uncles or whatever will put on that shut the tears off and put on that brave face because we know we have to be a man at that time. And
I think we do it quite often.
And I'm using the term man as an adjective there. And, to me, watching him disgustingly start riots, okay, like during the presidential campaign, what he did in Seattle, he was inciting riots. Whether you like the show or not, he deliberately tried to incite an on-air riot with the Young Turks, calling out family members of the Sandy Hook victims. The parents, haven't they gone through enough? I mean, if there's anybody who deserves the karma strike, it's probably Alex Jones, character or not. But it's the free speech I worry about. Take Alex out of it.
Let's circle all the way back around, and maybe, just maybe, these platforms and media companies are looking at Alex Jones and going, it's enough. This is enough. We need to set an example.
Exactly. Like those lawsuits against Alex Jones from the Sandy Hook parents, I hope they win. I do. I hope they win.
I do too. Some of the claims, and we won't go down that road too far, but some of the claims and ideas that he's put out there, they're beyond fear mongering. They're hateful in many ways. I mean, some of the things that he has said verge on being dangerous, but he still has the right to say them.
I fully agree. As stupid as it sounds, I mean, let's face it. If you're shutting him down for the stupidity and the hate speech, you got to do it with the KKK. You have to do it with terrorism groups. You have to do it with other outlandish groups as well. It's not pick and choose. That's my worry. That is my concern.
I agree with you completely. And what happens if we wake up tomorrow or in a couple of days and these platforms begin to do that? What if they do censor the KKK or, ban them from their platforms, or other neo-Nazi groups, or any kind of fringe group that may espouse some hate-like speech?
I agree.
What happens then? What is the response?
Well, I think what it is people also have to start using their heads rather than hiding behind social media and the internet like they've done for years. All right? There's a difference between snarking and trolling.
There is?
Yes, believe it or not.
I got this all wrong.
I know. My friend, we can continue this debate tomorrow if you wish, as I know you're going to be on it on the encounter leading up to it. Let's see where it goes. Tell people where they can find the encounter and stories about Alex Jones.
They can find the encounter at facebook.com/SOR the encounter online for right now.
All right, perfect. Everett Themer, we will talk to you tomorrow night with more of the encounter in the last half of the show. Appreciate it.
I can't wait.
Me either. Tomorrow night on the show, we got Geraldine Orozco back for another edition of The Spiritual You, which happens the first Tuesday of every month, where we go a little Zen and Chi, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. We also want to say thank you to Daryl Ashby for coming on tonight, talking about his book, 85 Grams, and the incredible story of Art Williams, Drug Czar. Incredible. You can get that at Amazon.com and Chapters, I believe. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is your official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Don't forget, if you want to come to our first annual Caribou Paracon, September 28th through 30th, tickets are now on sale. Just go to questers.ca, click on the fall conference. You can pick up your tickets right there. We want to see all the Spaced Out Radio listeners there, or as many of you as possible, so make sure you hit that and buy some tickets. I want to meet you. Come see David Weatherly, Grant Cameron, Lori and Fenton, Ross Allison, and so many more. We want to say a special thanks to everybody listening at home, in your cars, at work, wherever you may be, especially everybody on Spreaker. Great chat tonight. Everybody on Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio and the Veterans Club, the SOR Space Travelers. We keep getting bigger and better every single night because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Good night.